The envelope was thick, creamy, and embossed with gold foil. It sat on my kitchen island like a dare. Sterling Enterprises, 20 years celebration gala, black tie. Ballroom. One night only. I turned it over, thumb grazing the wax seal, and wondered, was this a formality or a final test? The RSVP deadline stared back at me. Midnight tonight. I left it unopened. Instead, I boiled water in the copper kettle Robert had insisted we buy during a trip to France. If we're going to entertain billionaires, we might as well boil water like one, he joked. That was 7 years ago. Before the silver streaks in his hair became fashionable. Before his voice turned colder during dinner. Before his new assistant started dressing like a red flag. The kettle hissed. I poured it over loose jasmine tea and let the scent fill the silence. This house was beautiful. Marble floors, gallery lighting, modern art picked out by a consultant with an eye for intimidation. But it echoed too loudly when I wasn't pretending. I carried my tea to the living room, sat on the edge of the cream velvet sofa, and turned on the television. It was already tuned to CNBC. There he was, Robert Sterling, speaking about mergers with the ease of a man used to winning. His smile looked real. His cufflinks glinted. The chirron beneath him read, Robert Sterling, visionary behind $2.1 billion Sterling Enterprises, no mention of the woman who'd signed his first office lease. No mention of me. I muted the sound. The gala invitation still sat on the counter, daring me. I could almost hear his voice in my head, careful and curated. Margaret, just be gracious. Mingle. Smile. Wear the green dress. Vanessa says it brings out your eyes. That's how far we'd fallen. He outsourced compliments to the woman half his age. I stood up, crossed the room, and poured the rest of the tea down the sink. The night of the gala arrived like a thundercloud, slow, heavy, and full of electricity. I wore black. Not the green dress he'd laid on the bed that morning with a post-it note. Don't be late. Important night. I burned the note. Wore heels that made no apologies. Painted my lips the same color as war. When I arrived at the Sterling Grand Hotel, the doorman smiled with reflexive politeness. Good evening, Mrs. Sterling. He still used my name like it meant something. That was nice. The valet took the Tesla. I kept the keys. Inside, chandeliers dripped crystal over a sea of ambition. Suits, gowns, backless dresses, and white smiles. The ballroom pulsed with old money and new secrets. A quartet played jazz too perfect to feel alive. Waiters floated by like shadows, balancing champagne and secrets. I scanned the crowd. There were the usual suspects, the governor's wife, layered in diamonds. Tech CEOs with half-buttoned shirts and egos spilling over. Wives in designer dresses whispering like they were born with brittle bones. Then, there he was. Robert. Polished. Poised. Telling some anecdote to a small cluster of board members who laughed before the punchline. He hadn't seen me yet. Which was strange, considering he used to be able to sense me from across a courtroom. But I no longer made noise when I entered a room. I made impact. I moved through the ballroom like a ghost with unfinished business. Every step I took gathered glances, some familiar, some curious, one openly disapproving from a woman I didn't recognize, but who clearly recognized me. Near the champagne tower, someone muttered, just loud enough, "She still shows up?" After everything. I smiled. Let them wonder what I knew. Let them squirm. At the far end of the room, Robert's laughter faltered. His eyes found me. I watched recognition ripple across his face. It wasn't joy. It was calculation. I knew that expression. He used it when contracts needed redlining or clients grew unpredictable. It was the face of a man solving a problem. A few people looked between us like they'd stumbled into a scandal mid-sentence. The kind of tension you can only buy with betrayal. Robert stepped forward, arms out. Margaret. You made it. I live 5 blocks away. Would have been rude not to. He reached to touch my elbow. I stepped back. His jaw twitched. Can we talk? Privately? I smiled. Sure. Right after your speech. Wouldn't want you to miss your standing ovation. He was still watching me when I turned away and walked toward the dessert table. A young server offered me champagne. She looked barely old enough to drive, but her eyes had already learned not to blink too fast in places like this. She looked at me and whispered, "You look like you know things." "I do," I said, taking a flute. I did. I knew everything now. The late nights, the fake meetings, the hotel receipts tucked into coat pockets I wasn't meant to check. Vanessa's lip gloss in our guest bathroom. The sudden changes to the company bylaws. I'd read every file, every contract, every clause. The only thing I hadn't decided yet was whether to stay silent or detonate. The orchestra began a slow waltz. Robert stepped onto the stage. People clapped like he'd cured cancer. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiled that charming politician smile. "Thank you for being here tonight. This celebration isn't just about me." I sipped the champagne. It was dry, expensive, and unmemorable. My phone buzzed. A message from my financial advisor. "Ready to execute the transfers Monday. Just say the word." My thumb hovered. Not yet. Let him finish his speech. Let him bask. Let him think he still owned the room. Because when it all came down, I wanted him to know exactly who had the power to burn it. By the time Robert finished his speech, the ballroom was glowing with applause. He stepped down from the stage like a man who'd just accepted sainthood. A line of executives gathered to congratulate him, an orderly queue of sycophants in satin and silk. I stood apart, back near the grand piano, one hand on a flute of champagne, the other on my pulse. He hadn't mentioned me. Not once. Not as a co-founder. Not as the woman who believed in him when all he had was a leased office and a borrowed dream. A man I'd known for 20 years clapped Robert on the back. She would have been proud, he said. I wasn't sure if he meant Robert's mother or his mistress. Either way, it wasn't me. My heel caught in the thick carpet as I turned. It was like wading through velvet. I moved through the crowd, brushing shoulders with people who used to call me for help with donor events, investment referrals, or discreet legal favors. Now they smiled too hard. Too bright. Like I was someone to be handled, not greeted. Patricia Webb, the governor's wife, air-kissed both of my cheeks. Her voice was dipped in butter. "Margaret, you look stunning. But you've always had that classic dignity." Dignity. Not beauty. Not charm. Just the word they use when you're supposed to go quietly. "You must be so proud of Robert tonight," she added, tilting her head slightly, as if checking to see if I was still pretending. "We both built this," I said. "Pride doesn't expire because someone else forgets who poured the foundation." Her smile slipped just a fraction before she excused herself, muttering something about checking on the silent auction. I kept walking. That's when I heard the first whisper. Two women near the coat check, pretending to look at the raffle prizes. "She still doesn't know, poor thing." Vanessa told me they've been planning the transition for months. The board's already on board. And she doesn't even have her own lawyer, can you imagine? They froze when they saw me standing 5 feet away. I offered them a nod as if I hadn't heard. But inside, something cracked. Not rage. Not even sadness. Just clarity. By the seafood tower, I spotted Janet Morrison, one of the founding investor wives. She'd once told me I was the only woman in the firm who didn't cling to power like a purse dog. I think she meant it as a compliment. Tonight, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, her husband gave me a thin-lipped nod and muttered, "Tough night for you, huh?" I walked on. Near the velvet curtain, the air shifted. Then I saw her. Vanessa. Scarlet dress. Sculpted to her frame like a weapon. Her blonde hair coiled over one shoulder in an arrangement that must have cost more than most people's rent. She wasn't even pretending not to gloat. She turned, surprised to find me watching. "Oh, Margaret." Like she'd stepped in something unfortunate. I smiled politely. "Vanessa. How lovely to see you." She leaned in, all sugar and steel. "I wasn't sure you'd come. This event is pretty strategic." mostly for shareholders and executive partners. I tilted my head. Oh, I know. I used to host them, remember? Her smile flickered. I let silence do the work. The kind that fills cracks and breaks things apart. Then she said it. I think there's been some miscommunication. Robert's lawyers were supposed to reach out to you about some restructuring. Were they? I said calmly, but my nails bit into my champagne glass. She dropped her voice an octave. The shares in your name, there's a sunset clause Robert initiated last quarter. Some of your positions were reclassified. You're no longer technically active. It took everything in me not to laugh. The sunset clause. A term Robert and I once coined together when we were redrafting founder protections. The irony was suffocating. Before I could respond, 2 security guards emerged behind her. I recognized them. Both men had opened countless doors for me, once offering umbrellas in the rain, walking me to my car. Now, they didn't meet my gaze. Vanessa gave a small shrug, her voice syrupy. It's protocol, I'm afraid. Board compliance. They're just escorting non-cleared guests off the executive floor. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. My body froze. I felt it, the weight of the eyes in the room, the sudden stillness, the realization. This was planned. Every detail. I looked to Robert. He was across the ballroom, shaking hands with a Saudi investor. He looked up just as I was being approached. And then he looked away. Smoothly. Deliberately. I didn't resist as the guards touched my elbow. The walk toward the exit felt endless. The crystal chandeliers blurred. The music kept playing. People went back to their shrimp and secrets. Vanessa stayed behind, her red dress a ribbon of arrogance wrapped around the man I used to believe in. The marble lobby was colder than I remembered. The glass doors hissed open without ceremony. The city outside buzzed with life, unaware that a woman had just been erased like an outdated draft. I paused before stepping out. No tears. No collapse. Only one thought. Let them think they've won. Because next week, I wouldn't need an invitation. I'd be buying the building. The moment the hotel doors closed behind me, the cold hit like a slap. Not from the wind, it was barely a breeze, but from the silence. The kind that follows a performance. Because that's what it had been, hadn't it? A performance staged by Robert and Vanessa, complete with lighting, music, and security. They'd rehearsed it down to the last smirk. And the audience had applauded. I stood on the steps of the Sterling Grand, hands steady at my sides, and stared up at the glittering ballroom windows. The place where I had once sealed deals with eye contact and charm. Now, I was airbrushed from the frame like a wrinkle in a photograph. My phone buzzed. David Chin. My financial advisor. Margaret, are we greenlit for Monday morning? I didn't hesitate. Green. That night, I didn't cry. I drove past our house. Past the manicured lawn, the limestone pillars, the security lights that flicked on automatically like obedient servants. I didn't stop. Instead, I went downtown, to a hotel Robert never liked because he thought the lobby was too modern. I booked a suite under my maiden name, Hartford. The name sounded strange on my tongue at check-in, but good strange, like something I hadn't tasted since youth. The bellhop asked if I was in town for business or pleasure. I smiled. Both. By 6 a.m., my war room was assembled. The suite's sleek dining table held files stacked in tidy piles, incorporation documents, profit distributions, contracts I had signed, deals I had facilitated. Each one notarized, time-stamped, filed with the kind of obsessive thoroughness Robert had once found hot. My laptop lit the space like a surgeon's lamp. I pulled up the clause he never thought I'd remember. Article 3, Section C. Any founding partner holding more than 10% equity has the authority to trigger emergency audit proceedings in the event of material fraud, misrepresentation, or breach of fiduciary trust. My ownership stake was still registered. The sunset clause Vanessa mentioned didn't legally exist. It had never passed a board vote. But Robert was betting I didn't know that. He was betting I'd break down, not break open. I called David again. Execute the trade. All 17 million. Pull it by market open. He whistled. That's going to shake the tree. Let it fall. I also instructed him to freeze every joint account, savings, checking, credit, corporate perks. Even the gym membership Robert never used. Next, Linda, our travel agent. Margaret. Tuscany's in 2 weeks. Don't tell me you're changing it again. Cancel the villa. The flights. All of it. But you paid the non-refundable, I said cancel. I clicked end call. The first ripple hit at 8:13 a.m. Robert's call. I let it go to voicemail. By 8:24, the stock had dropped 3%. By 9:02, the board had convened an emergency session. By 9:15, Vanessa texted me. Can we talk? Maybe this got out of hand. I screenshotted the message, labeled it Phase 1, Panic, and archived it. Then I opened a new email. To board@sterlingenterprises.com subject. Formal notice of stakeholder action. I attached my declaration of divestment. No emotional commentary. Just numbers and ownership math. By 10 a.m., Margaret Hartford was no longer an executive ghost. She was a detonation. The door to my suite buzzed. Room service. Black coffee. 2 soft-boiled eggs. Toast. Fuel. The television played financial news in the background. A ticker scrolled across the bottom. Sterling Enterprises plunges after unexpected shareholder shakeup. Unexpected. That word made me grin. By noon, the calls had multiplied. David again. Sterling's general counsel just reached out. They want to discuss amicable resolution. They'll want a time machine next. They say Robert is emotional. Good. Let him feel something. Then came the knock I'd been waiting for. I opened the door to see Sarah, my sister. Always impeccably overdressed for crisis. She held a large latte and a look of practiced concern. I brought caffeine, she said. And a warning. I stepped aside. She sank into a chair, heels clicking nervously. Robert's been calling everyone. He's saying you're having a breakdown. That you're acting out of spite, and he's scared, I said flatly. He should be. She blinked. He's still your husband. No. He's a man who weaponized my loyalty and forgot I knew where all the vaults were buried. Sarah exhaled. You were always so precise. I never thought you'd go nuclear. I didn't. I just pulled my half of the power cord. The lights went out because he couldn't stand in the dark. That evening, as the skyline turned amber, I logged into the company's internal server. My name was still listed on several board distributions. All the fingerprints they'd missed in the cover-up. Vanessa had tried to edit history with a Sharpie, but I wrote in permanent ink. At 7:36 p.m., the Sterling Enterprises homepage crashed for 12 minutes due to what their CTO called unusual access behavior. Translation: someone tried to lock me out. Too late. I'd already copied everything. By midnight, the suite was quiet again. I stared at the lights of the city, the same ones I used to look at while waiting for Robert to come home late from business dinners. The city hadn't changed. But I had. For the first time in years, I felt no desire to explain myself. Not to Robert. Not to Sarah. Not to anyone. The next morning, a delivery arrived. A single envelope, hand-delivered. No return address. Inside, a note in Robert's handwriting. Please, let's talk. Before this goes too far. Too far? He had no idea how far I could go. But he was about to find out. The Sterling Enterprises boardroom had always reminded me of a cathedral. Vaulted ceilings, dark walnut panels, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline like a preacher watching over his flock. The conference table stretched long enough to fit 20 egos and still have room for dessert. I hadn't been in that room in almost 3 years. Not since Robert politely suggested I step back from active strategy and focus on wellness. A euphemism for invisibility. This morning I arrived 15 minutes early. Not as a wife. Not as a guest. As the storm they'd tried to ignore. James Morrison, the CFO, entered first. He paused in the doorway like he'd walked into the wrong funeral. "Margaret," he said, surprised and cautious. "Still breathing, James." "Disappointing, I know." He nodded, sheepish, and took his seat at the far end. One by one, the others filed in: partners, counsel, outside investors. I watched them fumble over greetings, unsure whether to shake my hand or pretend I was a ghost. I sat at the head of the table, Robert's old seat. No one dared ask me to move. Then, finally, Robert arrived. His usual punctuality was gone. His tie was askew, his expression tight, hair no longer perfectly arranged. For a moment, he stood just inside the door, staring at me. His face looked older than it had on stage 3 nights ago. More human. But I didn't blink. He sat without a word. Vanessa followed close behind, in a muted navy dress and no lipstick, stripped of her performative confidence. The chair next to him remained awkwardly empty. He didn't offer her a seat. Smart. Patricia Webb from legal cleared her throat. "Let's begin." She tried to speak with neutrality, but her voice trembled as she scanned the documents in front of her, the same ones I had emailed the board 48 hours earlier. The resignation of Margaret Sterling as shareholder. The official liquidation of my 17% stake. The forensic audit requests. The asset freeze notifications. Robert was pale. I leaned forward. "Does anyone require clarification on the documents?" Silence. I turned to Robert. "You once told me that in business, control is perception. That power doesn't have to shout, it just has to act." He didn't speak. Just looked at the table, hands clasped. "So let me make the perception clear," I continued. "For 2 decades, I built this company with you. Quietly, yes, but intentionally. Every contract you signed, I vetted. Every investor you won, I hosted. Every major deal, my connections, my capital, my risk." Vanessa stared hard at the polished surface in front of her, jaw clenched. "You used my name on the founding documents, Robert. You used my inheritance to secure your first loan. And then you tried to erase me." I opened a folder. "These are the original incorporation records from 2002. My name is listed as co-founder. Here are the partnership contracts you revised without board approval. And here, I dropped a thick packet in front of him, is the evidence that you've redirected bonuses, stock options, and travel expenses to an employee who had no formal executive role." Vanessa's face strained of color. I met her eyes. "That's you, by the way." James cleared his throat, fidgeting with his pen. "Margaret, this is serious. If what you're presenting is accurate, it's not if," I interrupted. "It's already in the hands of the compliance auditors. These are formal disclosures." Robert stood abruptly, palms flat on the table. "This doesn't have to be public." "But it will be," I said. His voice rose. "You want revenge? Fine. You've made your point. You've humiliated me. Just don't destroy everything we built." My hands tightened, but my tone stayed even. "You destroyed it when you decided I was expendable. When you let your mistress put her hand on my arm and call me a non-cleared guest." Vanessa flinched. Robert opened his mouth, then closed it. I slid another paper across the table. "This is my recommendation to the board. Effective immediately, I suggest Robert James Sterling be removed as acting CEO pending investigation into misconduct, fiduciary violation, and hostile corporate behavior. This would allow the company to restructure, salvage reputation, and, most importantly, survive." Gasps rippled across the room. Even James leaned back, stunned. Robert stared at the document as if it might bite him. "You can't do this," he whispered. "You wouldn't." "I already have." Vanessa stood suddenly, voice sharp with panic. "This is personal vendetta. This woman is unstable." She's right," said Patricia quietly, finally looking at me. "Legally, ethically, strategically." Robert looked at her, betrayed. "Patricia, she has receipts," Patricia said. "Literal receipts. Years of them. You're lucky she gave you the option of stepping down instead of pressing criminal charges." He looked back at me. His mouth moved, but no words came. Good. Let him taste the silence I'd been living in for years. I stood, gathered my papers, turned to face the board. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here for restoration. This company was built on a lie, that Robert Sterling did it alone. I'm just putting the truth back into the foundation. I looked at Robert one last time. You always said I was good at staying quiet. Turns out I'm even better at being loud. As I walked out, Vanessa followed, voice frantic. Margaret, please, this isn't what you think. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I turned on her in the hall. Her mask had cracked. You knew exactly how far it would go. You just didn't think I'd get there before you. She shrank back. I kept walking. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Behind me, the boardroom erupted into crosstalk and chaos. I didn't look back. I had one hand on the elevator rail and the other in my coat pocket, clutching the folded copy of my divorce papers. Time to deliver those next. The divorce papers were heavier than they looked. Crisp white, black ink, every paragraph a surgical incision. The kind that cuts clean, but deep. 23 years summarized in numbered clauses and asset divisions. I held them in my lap as I sat outside Robert's office building, the same one we signed the original lease for 2 decades ago. Back then, it had been a narrow room above a Thai restaurant, with squeaky chairs and more hope than heat. Now it was 30 stories of glass and metal. I had helped build every one of them. I didn't have to do this in person. A courier would have been sufficient. But something inside me, not rage, not revenge, something older, quieter, more rooted in dignity, insisted I show up. One last time. A final burial. The receptionist looked up when I entered. Mrs. Sterling, Miss Hartford, I corrected gently. Oh. I'm sorry, should I let him know you're here? I nodded, offering her a closed smile. She looked 24, maybe, with soft eyes and chipped polish on her thumb. She probably had no idea what was happening upstairs. Or maybe she did. Maybe women always know. I waited by the windows. The lobby still smelled like citrus and cedar, the scent Robert had chosen to make clients feel secure and seduced at the same time. His words, not mine. The elevator dinged. Robert stood inside. Alone. No tie. No entourage. Just him. For a moment, we stared at each other. His eyes were bloodshot. Not from alcohol. He never drank much. This was exhaustion. Humiliation. Fear. The building was still standing, but the man was crumbling. I walked toward him, heels clicking like punctuation. He opened his mouth. Margaret, I'm not here to talk. I handed him the envelope. He looked down, swallowing hard. I was hoping we could. There's nothing left to negotiate. Everything we built is either mine, yours, or in ruin. Pick your pile. A beat passed. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't form. You're not the villain you thought you were, I said. You're just a man who underestimated the woman holding the blueprint. He flinched like I'd struck him. I turned and walked out. Didn't look back. I returned to the hotel suite that evening and found myself standing at the floor-to-ceiling window, watching headlights sweep across the freeway like veins pulsing through the city. The legal war was over. The financial damage was irreparable. Robert had resigned. Vanessa had taken a leave of absence. The company would survive, but it would never be what it was. Good. Maybe now they'd build something honest. Still, the silence was enormous. The kind of silence that follows earthquakes. I made tea and sat on the floor, wrapped in a cashmere shawl that used to hang in the back of Robert's closet. The smell of him had faded. I let it. At 2:13 a.m., I found myself scrolling through old photographs on my phone. Not of Robert. Of me. Photos taken by accident or cropped from group shots. Blurry, off-center, unintentional glimpses of someone I barely remembered. A woman half smiling in the background. Hair neat, eyes alert, posture straight. Always dressed to match the decor. She looked like a guest at her own life. I stared at one from 5 years ago. I was pouring champagne at a company holiday party, mid-laugh, watching Robert tell some story I'd heard 12 times. He had his hand on Vanessa's lower back, guiding her toward a circle of investors. I remembered that moment. I'd chosen to ignore it. The photo hit like a sucker punch. Not because of the betrayal, but because of the woman in the picture. She looked invisible. I closed the gallery and opened the front camera. Stared at myself in real time. Same cheekbones. Same storm gray eyes. But something in my expression had shifted. I wasn't smiling. And I didn't need to be. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I walked to a café alone. No makeup. No jewelry. Just a black sweater, worn jeans, and the kind of shoes you wear when you're not trying to prove anything. I sat by the window with a notebook. I wrote one line at the top of the page. What did Margaret Hartford want before she became a Sterling? And I waited. At first, nothing came. Then, like roots breaking through soil, the answers emerged. Photography. Travel. Freedom. Space to fail. Silence without tension. A room of her own. I kept writing until my coffee went cold. The days that followed blurred. Divorce finalization meetings. Transfer of asset calls. Lawyers reciting line items like they were eulogies. Robert never contested anything. He signed where he was told. That was the final proof I needed, that he never believed I'd follow through until the ground gave out beneath him. His last email simply read, "I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved more than I gave you. I hope one day you find something that feels like home." I didn't reply. Some doors don't deserve to be closed gently. 1 week later, I bought a camera. Not a sleek new model, but an old Nikon D90 I found in a secondhand shop, the same kind I used in college. It still had the scratch on the shutter I remembered, like a scar. I took it everywhere. Shot women in cafes. Street vendors on corners. Strangers waiting for trains. One photo in particular stuck with me, a woman in her 60s sitting on a bench, crying and laughing at the same time, a wedding ring still on her finger, but turned inward. I printed it, framed it, put it beside my bed. It reminded me of myself and not. The first gallery that agreed to show my work was called Meridian. The owner, Elena, was blunt and brilliant. She didn't ask about my past. She only looked at the images and said, "You photograph women like you're saving them from disappearing." "I'm trying," I said. Then came the idea, a portrait series. Not of models. Not of curated perfection. But of women reclaiming their lives. After divorce. After death. After silence. We called it Reclaimed. I became obsessed with the work. Not as a distraction, but as a re-entry. I photographed women in transition. Women in recovery. Women who had been erased and were learning to be visible again. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized I wasn't documenting them. I was documenting myself. The night before the gallery opening, I walked through the space alone. My photos lined the walls, women in doorways. Women lighting cigarettes. Women staring into mirrors without flinching. At the far end of the room hung a final photo, me. Taken by Elena without my knowledge. I was standing in front of a mirror, hair pulled back, camera in hand, unaware. My shoulders squared, eyes tired but alive. The caption read, "She finally saw herself." I stood in front of it for a long time, letting the tears fall, soft and private. Not because I was broken. Because I had finally stopped pretending I wasn't. The gallery buzzed with life. Strings of warm Edison bulbs cast a soft glow over exposed brick walls, their imperfect texture grounding the elegance of framed photographs. Conversations rose and fell like the tide, polite, curious, occasionally reverent. Some came for the art, some for the press. But most, I suspected, came to see the woman who had burned down an empire and built something quieter from the ash. I moved through the space with a glass of sparkling water in hand, no longer afraid of being seen. Not because I was trying to prove anything. Because I wasn't trying at all. Near the entrance stood Elena, the gallery director, surrounded by a cluster of art critics and younger photographers who hung on her every word. She saw me and gave a slight nod, not of approval, but of respect. The kind women give each other when they've survived something unspeakable and chosen not to wear it like a wound. Across the room, a woman stood alone, staring at one of the pieces. It was a black and white portrait of a grandmother holding her daughter's divorce papers like a birth certificate, both of them mid-laugh, like something had finally been born after years of silence. The woman stepped closer, blinking hard. "I know her," she said softly to no one. "That's me." I approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You allowed me to photograph you at the clinic. You didn't think I was serious." She turned to me, eyes bright. "I didn't think I was worth documenting." "You are," I said. Later, a man in his early 30s approached with his partner. "We wanted to thank you," he said. "My mom went through something like this. She saw your interview online and said it made her feel witnessed." His partner added, "She bought a camera." I smiled. "Tell her to use it. The lens doesn't judge. It just remembers." That night, 3 pieces sold. Not for their market value, but because someone saw themselves in them. It felt like being read in a language I didn't know I spoke. After the closing remarks, after the wine was poured and the final compliments exchanged, I stepped outside onto the gallery's back terrace, away from the noise. The city skyline unfolded in front of me, tall and lit and unsentimental. Just like me. I closed my eyes, letting the cool air sweep across my face, and allowed myself a private truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Robert. Not at Vanessa. Not even at myself. The grief had hollowed something in me, yes, but it had also cleared space. Room to rebuild. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text. From an unknown number. But the tone was familiar. I saw the coverage. "The show looks beautiful. You do too. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure. Just pride, I guess. R." I stared at the screen. No rush of heat. No tremble in my chest. Just neutrality. The kind you earn after mourning something that never loved you the way you needed. I deleted the message without replying. Not in bitterness, but because it no longer belonged in my story. 2 weeks later, I signed the lease on a small coastal cottage 2 hours north. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't polished. The floorboards creaked, the windows stuck, and the garden looked like it had survived several storms and never fully recovered. Perfect. There was a sunroom with natural light and enough space for a darkroom and editing setup. The previous owner had painted the walls lemon yellow and hung lace curtains that danced when the breeze came in. For the first time in decades, I chose a home without consulting anyone. No approval. No design board. No compromises. Mine. I unpacked slowly. Deliberately. Not because I had too much. Because I finally had only what mattered. Photographs. Journals. My grandmother's ring. The Nikon. And a worn copy of letters to a young poet that I found in a box labeled college. Inside it, folded between pages, was a note written in my handwriting. "Don't forget you are not a background character." I sat down and wept. Not from sadness. From recognition. The seasons shifted. I fell into a rhythm. Coffee by the window. Walks to the tide pools. Portrait sessions with local women who'd heard about the gallery and wanted to be part of something real. They came with grief. With healing. With laughter like thunder. I documented them not as subjects, but as mirrors. Each click of the shutter was a form of prayer. One foggy afternoon, I was photographing a woman named Celeste, 61, widowed, recently retired, hands like river stone, when she paused and looked at me curiously. "You're different from other photographers," she said. "How so?" "You don't try to hide that you've been through something." I adjusted the focus. "Neither do you." She smiled. "You make women feel like they're not starting over," she said. "Just starting." 6 months passed. Then one day, I received a letter. Real paper. Real ink. No return address. Inside, thank you for turning silence into a chorus. For showing us that we don't need to stay grateful for small cages just because they came with chandeliers. Your story saved mine. Keep going. A woman you'll never meet. I placed it on my desk. Framed it. Next to a photograph of my younger self, the one pouring champagne at Robert's party. I didn't hate her anymore. She didn't know yet, but she would. The final portrait in my second exhibit was titled, The Architect. It was a self-portrait. Not of my face. Of my hands. Dusty. Weathered. Steady. One holding a camera. The other holding nothing, open, ready, free. And beneath it I wrote, she didn't rebuild the house. She built the land it stood on. And this time, she built it in her name.